To me, it's not really about activism in itself for the sake of activism. It's just like, using your voice to just speak your truth.
Hello, print friends, and welcome to the 66th episode of Pine Copper Lime, the internet's #1 printmaking podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. I release weekly podcasts with people in the print world who are doing something a bit beyond the expected. So please subscribe on your podcast listening app of choice. You can find Pine Copper Lime on Instagram and Facebook, and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter with print news from around the world, all at pinecopperlime.com. We are on the cusp of this little printmaking podcast turning 2 years old. Next episode, actually. And here at PCL, we love a giveaway, so you better believe that for our 2-year anniversary, it's going to be a doozy. So, make sure that you are following Pine Copper Lime on that Instagram for when it drops next week. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. This episode of Pine Copper Lime is brought to you by our sponsor, Speedball Art Products, who've been bringing you a diverse range of high-quality products to your creative practice since 1997. Their newest, exciting initiative is Speedball's Print Posse. Working with contemporary printmaking icons, Speedball has invited each artist to design and name an ink of their choosing. So, head on over to speedballart.com to learn more and to find out where you can pick up a can of your new favorite ink. This episode is also brought to you by McLean's Printmaking Supplies. Their small specialist team in the Pacific Northwest is the leading supplier of Japanese relief tools for printmaking in the US and abroad. Our editor, Timothy Pauschak's 2 favorite tools are his Watatsu Wari Sankakuto 3mm V-gouge and his Josui Maruto 1mm U-gouge, both from McLean's. But you don't have to take our word for it. These tools will speak for themselves. So, head on over to imcleans.com to find your new favorite tool and keep on carving. One last little bit of print news for you. The West Virginia University School of Art and Design's printmaking program is looking for motivated and ambitious artists who want to be a part of their active print community. And between now and January 15th, they are waiving application fees for their MFA and MA programs. You might recognize the name West Virginia University from my chats with Stephanie Alans and Martin Mazzora, both who studied in the printmaking program there. You can apply for free using the code GRWVU25. Assistantships and waiver hours are also available to incoming students. Learn more at artanddesign.wvu.edu or check out their printmaking professor Joseph Lupo on Instagram at lupo_Joseph. All the details are in the show notes. My guest this week is Mazatl, who, if you've ever been on Instagram and you've ever searched for printmaking, he probably doesn't need an introduction. Mazatl is known for his stunning, distinctive, and self-taught style of carving. We talk about growing up in Mexico in a hometown with drugs and violence, finding a sense of freedom in the punk scene, activism as a means of speaking your truth, and street art as community in the time of Corona. I'm also very pleased to say that this episode is also another double release in collaboration with our friend Ronaldo Gil-Zambrano. In this version, I talk with Mazatl in English. Ronaldo has another version in Spanish. So, make sure to check out the other side of this double release in the feed. Now, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to break out the wheat paste with Mazatl. Hi Mazatl, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing good. I'm over here in southern Mexico, surviving the pandemic.
Yeah, I feel like as long as any of us is doing that, we can answer good when people are asking us. Yeah. Well, I'm really, really pleased that we finally were able to line up time zones with you, and because you're generously doing 2 interviews with us, one with Ronaldo as well, of course, which will be in Spanish. So we were doing the 3 time zone dance, but now, yeah, we finally were able to meet up. And I know your work from, I think, even before I really started studying printmaking and getting into printmaking. I come across it on Instagram, naturally, where so many works of art are discovered these days. And was just instantly taken with it, just like the skill of your carving and the imagery, which is so wonderful. But for anyone listening who might not know you or your story, can you just let people know, by way of introduction, just who you are and where you are, and how would you describe what it is that you do?
First, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to do the podcast. And I first started to see what you were posting online on Instagram, but it took me a while to figure out that it was a podcast. It's just like a printmaking page or profile, and then I just listened to a few of the podcasts, and it's amazing. I'm glad, I'm happy to be on. And I'm glad that you're taking the task on,
Oh, thank you.
And certainly when I started, it was like, here I just knew like a bunch of older guys, doing printmaking in tiny little studios and workshops. It's nice and great to kind of see it, revive and like a younger generation take over, because it was definitely feeling like it was dying out, as the previous generation was getting older, and definitely the art form, seeing like galleries not being as interested in carrying prints, because they were not one of a kind and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I started getting like involved with printmaking in my early 20s, and it was mainly because I think I was sort of used to seeing printmaking and sort of the folklore of Mexico, and in textbooks, and just basically like any Day of the Dead sort of reference always sort of went back to Posada and late printmakers, Manilla, Posada, and Picheta mainly. And then I just kind of became curious, and I started doing it. I was first involved with, as a kid, I was always drawing, and then in my teens, I was doing graffiti. And then, it came to a point where I just started getting interested in other art forms, and printmaking was the first one that I, really fell in love with.
So did you grow up in Mexico then?
Yeah. I grew up in the state of Sinaloa, in northwest Mexico, and on a beach town. There is not a lot of sort of like art tradition there. There's a lot of music that comes from there, but that's sort of like where most of the culture gets focused on, all the folklore, and then I guess there's a big carnival there that happens, and so there's like puppets and floats, these big carnivals and that kind of thing. But other than that, not a lot of visual art that comes from there.
Yeah, and so you said that you sort of grew up drawing, and then were drawn to printmaking because sounds like you were just sort of seeing it in your visual culture, and it was intriguing you. So then how did you actually get to the point where you picked up a block or a lino cut and started carving?
Well, first, I was doing just regular graffiti, like tags and just like, very like basic stuff. And then now it just kind of felt foreign at some point. I was like, I wanted to do more stuff. And then I kind of, became aware of, like stencils and sort of like that sort of graphic art. And I guess the first form of printmaking that I was aware of was silk screening. We had since I was a teenager, I've been involved with the sort of DIY punk scene in Mexico, and silk screening has played a big part. Like making T-shirts and zines and that kind of thing. And we had a little space in my hometown where we set up a little silk screening shop. mainly to do shirts and sell them, and to just basically make our own shirts that we wanted to do that we couldn't get because it was a small town. I guess that was like my first go at pre-making. Then stencils came, and then I kind of started seeing pre-making in different forms, and mainly in sort of zines and images that were not directly like prints. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a piece of paper that was printed straight from the block. It was
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
reproduction of the image. And I always loved the way that it looked, and I always had an interest in the way that shapes could be made from lines. And I also grew up like looking at comics and also, graphic novels and sort of, there's this a couple authors, this guy Kino, he's from South America, and my dad had a couple of his graphic novels, and I just I remember like spending hours looking at them and being just mesmerized by like the ways that he would create values and shapes through just lines and textures.
That's really interesting what you were saying about, really looking at the comics and looking at how graphic way of making images, how does one create textures and that kind of thing. Because one of the things that I was really interested about was how you came to develop your style, because it's really distinctive. And, like I mentioned in the intro, you can tell that you have really beautiful technical abilities just by looking at it, the way they're carved, but you also have developed this unique aesthetic as well that's, very much you. And I know that a lot of young printmakers, when they're out there, they're really kind of searching for that. They're looking to find their voice, and you've definitely found yours. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that journey at all, and if that started with the comics, or just what that was like for you to find a voice that really felt like your own.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like it's just constantly changing. Like as I grow older and then I just develop my stuff, then like my interests also change, and the focus of my life changes. But as a young kid, like just like the town that I grew up in, it's been sort of hit by violence and sort of like drug trafficking culture, and I just kind of grew up with it. So there is a lot of sort of angst and just exposure to injustice that I experienced as a kid. And, like I feel like that translated into what I do. It's been, especially early on, that was a big part of what I wanted to talk about and address in the work that I was doing. And in terms of my technique and the way that I do my images, I think it was, I mean, if it's unique at all, I think it's mainly because I just kind of learned from trial and error. Just kind of like I've always been interested in like I've always been really certain about the things that I'm interested in. And I've never shied away from sort of being like, well, like I like graffiti, but I like this other thing, and I like skating, and I like punk, and I like all this stuff. And I've never sort of shied away from mixing those things that were important to me and are important to me into what I do, So I think that, for example, I have friends who relate to certain parts of it because they come from similar subcultures or certain they've kind of had similar experiences. And, it's all kind of sort of meshed together into the work that I do, and that voice that you speak of. And I think for me, like, I'm self-taught, so a lot of the ways that I kind of went into it was, like, well, I really enjoyed looking at Kino or Posada or Manilla or all these older artists, Leopoldo Mendez, and I would try to sort of replicate and just test it out, and I'd always be like, well, how do I make it so that it sort of fits this modern context that we have, or sort of talk about the things that are relevant now. I don't want to just talk about what they were talking about. They already talked about it,
Yeah.
and sort of I think finding my own experience and being able to process it through artwork has been a sort of a huge part of the journey.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you're sort of speaking to understanding that really strong tradition in Mexico of printmaking, and your relationship to it is sounds like it's like you understand that it was, you know, really important for its time, and then you need to be making work that's important for your time. And I think some other Mexican printmakers I've spoken with, and even that Ronaldo and I have spoken with, the great pair, the Tres Gatos, they really talked about it in the sense of, you know, in a way, kind of feeling the tradition of printmaking in Mexico hanging over them a little bit, because it's what people associate so much with printmaking in Mexico. It's like, oh, Mexican printmaking, posada. But as living artists, living, breathing artists who are dealing with all of the really important issues that are happening today, it's almost like they need to shake that off a little bit. Like, not that they don't want to respect it and they don't want to turn to it as inspiration, but like to really understand that, like, it was, Posada was talking about very important things, and so are we, you know? It sounds like you're feeling that as well.
Right. I think, yeah, I think it's part of the process, you know. I think, like, as artists, like, there's a part of us that emulates, you know. We emulate nature, we emulate social structures, and I think, you know, what the work of other artists and what they do is also involved in that. You know, I think we learn, so we don't have to pick up from, you know, from zero. We can look at what they did, and sort of we have the ability to, you know, kind of keep going, you know. But then, you know, we take the turns that we see fit, and that allows us to have our own voice and not just, you know, keep a tradition for the tradition's sake.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you were growing up in, you talked about this town that you said had been hit, you know, hard with drug trafficking and violence, and that there was maybe sort of like a bit of kind of like a punk community or like a resistance community in that. Was that sort of in your mind or your experience growing up, was that like a direct reaction to seeing what was happening to the town, that kids were kind of getting, were getting angry, getting into activism, and like using art as a way to respond to that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, you know, punk culture is, you know, as a counterculture. It's very much, you know, a reaction to sort of the status quo or mainstream society. So it definitely, for me, it really gave me the ability and the sort of the sense that I could do whatever I wanted to, and it didn't have to be good. You know, it didn't have to be, you know, there was no professor that was telling me, oh, this is good, this is bad, you know, and would write things off. And it always, so I was able to kind of like put my work and my passion to use right away. It would be like, oh, we need an image for a zine, or we need a, you know, we have a banner that we need to paint for the march, or you know, or whatever, you know. So it kind of found a really useful avenue to be able to just kind of flourish and practice, you know, because you don't have the pressure, you know. It's just a bunch of your friends doing zines, and you want to, and you want to write a text for it. Then, you know, it's just a bunch of 15, 16 years old, you know. It's so, and there is sort of like that collective support in order to sort of develop the work and just kind of move forward with it.
I love that idea of developing your style, you know, just by doing, you know, not by looking to others to sort of like shape you into anything that's preconceived, but rather you finding your voice and you finding what interested you simply through the act of repeatedly doing, which
Right.
I think a lot of people feel like that they need more of a guidance, that they don't have that necessarily even that courage to just be like, I'm just going to make and make and make until I love what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And part of that, of course, is like what society teaches us, which is that like you can't know anything. You need to go pay a bunch of money for people, you know, who have letters after their name. They know something, right?
Right.
Yeah. So part of that is just the way we're taught that this is always done. But yeah, you were there just making kind of from necessity with your friends, because you wanted to create something.
Yeah, and that and that's a big part of punk culture. It's like most of the people that start playing instruments, because music is a big part of it. Then nobody knows how to play. They're just learning as they go. So it just kind of gave me agency and allowed me to sort of do what I wanted to do and not be like scrutinized by making mistakes.
And I think that leads well into my next question, which was the use of printmaking for activism. And so you've spoken to that a little bit, talking about kind of like the punk culture and resistance and making zines. But I know it's a big part of your practice, and I think just by seeing your work, you can tell that it's political, it's about extinction, it's about ecology, it's about politics. And I'm just hoping you could just maybe speak to that kind of in general about how you see like the act of printmaking as an act of resistance or an act of activism.
Yeah, well, I think more than anything, it's just it's a collective art form, and collectivity. It's built by sort of the effort of many people, and it's much easier to print with people than just printing by yourself. And the fact that you can reproduce the image and like print it as many times as you want, it's always kind of lent itself into it being more of a medium for sort of spreading ideas in a way. It's not just one precious painting that you need to have a gallerist or like an institution sell it for you because there's a lot of money. You can print it as many times as you want, and the first ones that end up with it or with the prints are your friends, or the people that helped you print. So there's sort of like a democratic aspect of printmaking that I really love, and it also kind of crosses over into being able to do paste ups with the prints and utilize it in a way that goes beyond just kind of this 2D form.
I love what you're saying in there about how the act of printmaking brings people together, because that is something that is, that is what activism is, right? Like this is what protest is,
Right.
is the collection of people like being together in one space. And of course, with Corona, our ability to gather safely has been extremely limited. And just sort of as you're talking about, I was thinking about how you could leave, one could leave like that sort of street art as a way to create that sense of togetherness when you can't actually be together. So someone could make could do a mural or a wheat paste up or even just like a tag of some kind, and that will stay there for a period of time where people walking by will be like, okay, like I'm not alone in this feeling, I'm not alone in this belief, even though I can't be there with people physically right now who hold my beliefs.
For sure, and it's always like doing stuff in the street, it's always like it lends itself to having a group of people that support you, because there's risks involved. And so, like going out with more than one person, who can watch your back and, look out for you and like carry the pace with you. And, it's always, it brings you together, and it also reminds you of, who you can trust, like sort of like there's a sense of friendship. And, like going back to, what you were saying about activism, like, to me, it's not really about activism in itself for the sake of activism. It's just like, it's, using your voice to just speak your truth, and I think that there's many truths, and like that can take so many different forms. I think when I was younger, I would feel more sort of judgmental of the way that people were making art. I was just kind of like, write it off and be like, well, yeah, but they're not saying anything. It's pretty, but it's like, what is it?
Mm.
But that was sort of my own relationship with it. I think now I'm much more welcoming of any sort of like ways that people can express themselves and also heal, because
Mm.
it's a crazy system that we live in, and I think that there's many ways that people can find in order to not just survive in the system, but like thrive, and thrive in a way that is communal and collective.
Speaking to that idea of collectives, I know that you're involved in a number of art collectives. The one I specifically know of, I think, is Just Seeds, but I know that there are others.
Hmm.
And can you tell us a little bit about art collectives and how they're kind of from your point of view continuing to function and create a sense of community in COVID?
Mm. Well, I think, well, in COVID, I mean, right now it's just crazy times. Like, I mean, it's kind of hard to say what the fate of things will be, but in terms of the ways that you can structure that, your community in order to sort of support each other, the chances of a project surviving when there is more than one mind at it is much greater, and it's much richer when you have the sort of like many people sort of working towards a similar goal, and it gives you the ability to speak and be supported by your community,
Mm.
and I think that's important because we're so hyper individualized. Sometimes I think in this era we're afraid to make mistakes, because we'll be scrutinized publicly, because you know, somebody will say something and or it will be misinterpreted. And having the ability to stand with more than just yourself and have the sort of the input of those people as you're creating is, I think, is really valuable.
That's really beautiful, and I think speaks to the way political movements, not just artistic political movements, but movements in general and progress in general happens, is this that idea of things will live longer and have a better shot the more people that are involved, because when people, you know if someone can't do it anymore, there's three more people to take up where they left off,
Right. And
and that's how change happens.
exactly. And I think, it gives you the ability to sort of like have just kind of, I think creativity has rhythms, and it's just sort of like trying to push yourself to always be creative and productive is that, I think that's more of a capitalist mentality,
Mm.
about like, making us machines who just like constantly producing, and that we have to have this just kind of like this genie is always available so that we can just continue to create and just make enough money to survive. When you're more than one person, then you can just sort of like have your times in terms of like your creative process, and that there'll be other people that are kind of walking next to you that are also producing and having their own rhythms, and sometimes they come together, and sometimes you're just like trying to figure things out in your own head.
Yeah, and with capitalism as well, there's such a sense of creation from fear rather than from joy. Yeah, you were speaking to that when you were saying, I have to do this because I have to make this money to do this thing, and and that you can't stop and take a breath. You can't stop for self-care. You can't stop to mourn. You can't stop to cry about anything. It's this, if you're like a shark, if you stop swimming, you'll die in
Right.
these systems. And it's because, part of that comes from because you're supposed to have your own apartment full of your own things, full of your just like your own world that no one else can touch, and it's yours, and that like that is somehow like your own clothes that are the right kind of clothes, and that
Right.
all of this is something that this is the sign of a good life. Like, this is what
Right.
we're given.
Right. It's like
And
it's what you
yeah.
have rather than who you are that is valuable.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's such a difficult thing to achieve as
Mhm.
well individually. And it's something that does not lead to happiness. I think that, like, people are just becoming more and more disconnected, and that is, we're social creatures. We need to sit around a fire at night together, not an individual tiny screen, playing How I Met Your Mother. It's
Right.
like, yeah, and the more we get separated, the harder it is for us to live, and the more we have to keep running on a capitalist hamster wheel.
Right. And I think what you're saying is really important because it sort of it, it we're confined to, and right now is like really extreme, but we're confined to our little spaces in which we feel like we have agency. But
Mm.
when we go outside into the public space, we don't, we feel like we can't do anything. We don't have a voice. We're not represented by the things that are outside. They're just kind of imposed on us. We're not asked if we want to see billboards. We're not asked if we want to like see another Starbucks
Mm-hmm.
open up. And I think that that's why it's so important to be able to go outside and just kind of speak through whatever means you have available. And in this case for me, like printmaking and murals and graffiti, like sort of without asking questions and just like kind of existing in the public space and not just being confined to this space that is your private property.
Mm.
It's kind of making our cities, our towns, places are inhabited by just by more than just the sort of the capitalist system and something that is trying to sell something to you.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's so wonderful about street art and public art is that it's free. It's just there. Like, you get to experience by virtue of the fact that you walked down that alley.
Hmm.
And I think that we're trained that like, if something's not exchanged for money, could it be any good? That's
Right.
one of the things that gets drilled into us. And street art pushes back against that so beautifully because obviously it's incredible. Like, the work you do is amazing. There's incredible street artists all over the world. And they're immediately pushing back against that idea that something can exist because it's good in and of itself, and you can enjoy it because it's good in and of itself, and money does not have to come into it at all.
Right. And it's funny because it's like even that, it's being co-opted and it's being like
Mm.
sort of repackaged and sold to people. It's just kind of like it's being flipped around, and big corporations are all of a sudden interested in what happened organically.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why for me it's so interesting, or I've been interested in sort of these countercultures because they just kind of happen organically out of people's passions, and there is no motive or motivation beyond just the desire to do it and the passion to do it. And I think, and there's certain freedom and release when you're able to do it. It's also empowering to go outside and just like get up and do do a paste up or paint something, and just kind of understand your own power and your ability to speak to people that are not that are just regular people that are passing by, and that
Mm-hmm.
could be people that don't like it and hate what you do, or people that love it. But I think one of the reasons to make art for me is to have that conversation. Whatever
Mm.
that conversation may end up being.
When I've worked with the public and kind of been a bit of an intermediary with some of the jobs that I've had in the arts in the last 10 years, like this podcast, like where I speak to an artist and then it's out there in the world for
Hmm.
free and anyone can listen to it, right? Any person with access to the internet can download the podcast.
Yeah.
And so I've had a lot of conversations with people who are sort of outside of the art world, and one of the biggest misconceptions, or it kind of makes it sound like the onus is on them, and that's not really right, but it's sort of one of the blocks that I found that people have
Mm-hmm.
is thinking, oh, I don't know anything about art.
Right.
And I just want to say, there's nothing to know. You just need to know if you like it or not. And you're
Right.
very much allowed to not like it. That's what
Yeah.
makes this interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's kind of, I mean, art happens so much like through feelings, much more than in your head. And I think when we're able to remove our minds from perception, like when you go and see a flower and you're like, oh, that's a beautiful flower, it's just like you understand that it just is, without having to sort of like put a description to it, and allow yourself to feel, what it makes you feel. I think that it's just like infinitely more powerful. And sometimes it's interesting when people just instantly want to know what things are about, instead of just like letting themselves feel how they feel, and that may be just enraged and angry because you like, pasted over a pristine wall. But it's always interesting, because people are able also to interact with what you do in the public space. They can tag over it, they can rip it up or paint over it. But then you kind of have the interaction that has already happened. You know that somebody interacted with it by changing it. And it has that quality of like impermanence. It's kind of like a mandala. It's kind of destroyed in the end, and it's like its nature is not to just like be pristine forever and ever. It's just, you just do it, and you just kind of let it go.
All art is inherently impermanent. It's just,
Right.
yeah, it's just that some art doesn't pretend that it's not,
Right. Right.
And it makes me think about how in the commercial art world, so much of it is just based around how archival is it? What's the documentation? All of this extreme amount of energy that goes into this has to be forever and ever and ever because someone has spent money on it.
Right.
And
It's an investment.
it's an investment, right? You can flip it in 20 years or 5 years,
Right.
or in that kind of thing. And
Yeah, especially if the artist dies, right? Like, oh, now
oh
this.
yeah.
Yeah. It's so crazy.
It's so crazy. And so it's funny too because we spend money all the time on things that are impermanent. We take trips, we have meals, we go to theater, and we interact with other forms of enriching our lives in ways that are impermanent. But for some reason, art, we don't interact with it that way. We don't think of it as, if I do exchange money for this, I'm exchanging it for the experience of viewing it or the experience of being with it. It's thought of as like, this is the object, rather than
Right.
how I'm responding to it is actually what I'm trading sort of money for labor for, which is interesting.
Right.
If it's visual art, if it's, if it falls into the rectangle form
Yeah.
of art making. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also changes the way the art is produced, because it's, if you make decorative art, like there's going to be more people are going to want to have it in their house that is like hanging, and then they look at it and it makes them feel good. And there's certainly a place for it in the world, but it's certainly not, that's not the only thing that we all have to say. And if we confine it to it being something that is pleasant, then we're limiting our ability to say whatever we want to say, and express how we're feeling. And and I think expressing how we feel and expressing what we're thinking, I think there's something that is cathartic about it. It's kind of like writing in a journal. You're able to just kind of get it out of the system. And I think that there is sort of like, if you do it from a genuine place, And that kind of goes back to your earlier question about finding your own voice. I think that's the most important thing. Like, it doesn't matter if it turns out ugly. Like, if it's a really, if it's true to what you feel and think and experience, I think people are going to connect with it no matter what. And I think that like I think that's the biggest, and it's probably the hardest, because we're also constantly changing, and we like a piece can connect with people, and then but if you keep making the same piece, like it may not connect in the same way, or you may not connect with it in the same way, which is like infinitely more important.
Yeah.
um, and like just being able to use your artwork as a way to sort of like wash those things out of your own system. I think it's powerful, and you realize that it's not just powerful for yourself, but there's value in speaking your truth. And all of a sudden, like as you do it, you realize it's like, whoa, this is not something that I experience myself only. People relate to it, and they're like, and they connect with it. It's like, you listen to pop music and you can like sing and dance to it, and it may be catchy, but I think, there's something about art forms that, you can connect with the sort of the sincerity of it. Like you listen to a song and it's like heartfelt, and you can just feel the person's soul put into it. And you're like, I don't know what this song is, but like, it just kind of touches somewhere deep. And I think that that's the power of art in general, like, it being visual or audio or video, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it always surprises me when I will sometimes see people's reaction to a work of art or to just any creative output if it's not decorative, and the reaction, if it has like a skull in it, or if it has, I don't know, who knows what in it, and people will be like, oh, that's not very nice.
Yeah.
And it's like, the we're not living in a very nice world. It's kind of like, this
Yeah.
is, yeah, like, things are really hard right now, and people are responding to that, and I always want to be like, what's going on in your world that you feel like you can control it in such a way that you only want nice things in it. Like,
Uh,
who
well,
are
I think
you?
like it's this like Hollywood mentality in which everything is polarized. It's like,
Mm.
it's like, oh, the good guy, he's like good looking, and he helps like homeless children, and he saves everybody, and then like all like this whole fucking like like in perception of what a good person is, this hero. And then the bad, the villain of this story is, like, not only does he like wants chaos for everybody, but he's all like also a
Mm.
sexual predator. And like it's just like the worst of the worst. It's just like, okay, how bad can you make this person, and how good can you make? And there's like no gray areas in between. And I think it's just like gives us this perception of like, like, well, good is like this, and anything that falls out of it, or everything that makes us feel slightly uncomfortable, is bad.
Yeah.
And falls into this villain category that I must avoid at all costs. And I think it's just like it creates this world in which there's very little room for like real humanity that is complex, and not just like a cookie cutter perception of reality.
And that somehow the goal in life is to never ever feel anything bad ever, like as
Right.
if that's possible. you know
Yeah.
and I feel like a lot of therapy, and a lot of the phrase I wanted to use was like good spirituality, but that's, maybe a little bit problematic. But I think a lot of the side of certain spiritualities that really help people is coming
Hmm.
to understand that it's not that there are good feelings and bad feelings. It's not like if you look at a work of art and that makes you uncomfortable, that is a bad feeling. You're not supposed to be having that feeling. It's more
Yeah.
like this is the whole tapestry of human experience, and
Right.
how you respond to it, that's in your control. You'll
Hmm.
never go your whole life without feeling anything bad ever again. But you can
Right.
decide, do I turn that into anger and hurt someone? Or do I examine why this feeling made me respond this way? Is it actually from my fear? Does it make me feel sad? Like, does looking at pieces that have to do with extinction, which I know you do a lot of work on, am I uncomfortable about it because I know that it's true? Well, maybe I should do
Right.
something.
Yeah. What's your relationship with, this experience that we're all having? And I think that it reminds, like, things that remind us of our own fragility
Mm.
and mortality. It just makes us uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and but it's like, oh man, I'm gonna die like one day, or maybe tomorrow, like who knows? and
Yeah.
and and it's like I'd rather not think about it, and we're just kind of prolonging this really central part of the human experience, or just like the experience of a sentient being.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna die, and it's like the longer you push away from it is the hardest it will be once we have to experience it, and not just in our own death, but also in the death of the people that we love, and our animal companions,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's hard. It's hard to, like, just push those things away until it's too late, and we were forced to face it.
Yeah, it's difficult not to think so much about Buddhism as I'm sitting here in
Hmm.
Thailand, and all of that, and how a big part of the Thai Buddhist traditions is not forgetting that you're going to die. And that
Hmm.
comes to one of the really deep tenets of it, which is impermanence, and
Yeah.
that grasping is our cause of our suffering. And
Yeah.
so the more attached you are to your own life, the more pain it will cause you when you think about it ending. But
Right.
if you understand that impermanence is just the nature of our existence, and that as sentient beings, the handoff of getting to, talk about art and talk about abstract ideas and dream and think about a past and a future
Hmm.
is knowing that we're going to die and having to deal with that. But so for so many people that falls into the category of, I don't want to think about that. Like, oh, that work of art has a skull in it. I don't want
Yeah.
that. And it's just this constant, like, I only like nice things. That's not a
Yeah.
nice thing. And it's that binary you were talking about. There are nice things and there are bad things, and like life is
Right.
good and death is bad, and that's the way it
Right.
goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because there's many cultures, and especially traditional cultures, have a reverence for, and a place for that aspect of life, which is dying and passing.
Mm.
I think, like, for example, in Tibetan culture, there's so many rituals and traditions that are revolving the experience of death, and the death of the people in our communities. Yet, like, in Western culture, for the most part, it's just kind of been, erased from our daily experiences. Like, oh, like somebody died, there's gonna be the funeral home is gonna come pick him up, clean him
Yep.
up, put him in a casket, and then we'll never have to see him again. We don't have to deal with cleaning him, right?
Yeah, paint them up so they look like they're alive, so we don't have to
Right.
think about it. They're just sleeping.
Yeah, right, right. And like, you were mentioning, like, Buddhist traditions, like, and if we look at the, Buddha's art, there's so much reminders of that fragility. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
reminders of like the sort of like the transience of life, and that it ultimately is just a transformation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like everything, when we eat, whatever we eat, we transform it into energy, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what we'll end up becoming. And that, like, I don't, for me, like, I don't separate art as a I was like, well, this is my life and this is art, you know, like it's all just part of like one one big
Yeah.
mixture of things. And I'd certainly take my life experiences and put them into my practice, you know, not just
Yeah.
like in terms of, you know, the ideas, but also the practice in itself and how I go about it. I think it's just like, you know, when we try to remove it, then we have like this is very strange experiences, you know, like
Yeah.
really removed, and then just become art becomes like a product or an object, like you were saying.
Yeah, and that separation and that struggling for permanence, that all comes back into that sort of capitalist view of art. You know, that like this piece has to stay forever, and like this artist has to be in a certain way, and they need
Hmm.
to be able to be categorized. Like, okay, where were they born? What year? You know,
Right,
boom, put it into the artsy database. You know,
right,
like, well, they can stay forever and ever.
right.
And that way of just living organically, where art is your life and life is your art, it doesn't fit that mold very well, because you to sort of, I think that people are often told to think about their art systematically,
Hmm.
and think about, you know, how do you market yourself kind of systematically in all of this, and that goes counter to, I think, a lot of the really important things you were saying about following your voice and following your intuition and being open to collaboration. That is difficult to do if you're thinking about just completely fitting into an existing framework. You don't
Yeah,
have the freedom to follow. Yeah.
yeah, and I think, you know, it's like I think there's just like in sort of like, you know, I mean, I call it Western society, but it's pretty globalized these days. But this kind of like modern mentality of like it's just like hyper individualism and you know, like this obsession with productivity and the way that we're perceived being much more important than the way that you know yourself.
Mm.
It just creates so many it's like so much confusion, and it's really hard to find your voice. And you know, I mean, it's a struggle for I think for all of us, because we exist in this world to have the space and time to be with it, you know, to be with yourself and just to listen to your own discomforts and to listen to your own contradictions,
Mm.
and kind of like find areas of opportunity and able to, you know, and being able to express those, even though those confronting ideas or confronting feelings within yourself, and ultimately finding that place in which you understand like how connected we are, you know, to
Mm.
everything. And I think that that's, you know, that's really the most powerful thing that we can do as sentient beings, you know. It's like just like being able to sit with yourself and living through those challenges, and just kind of like utilizing whatever tools you have available to process that and just find sort of communion in that discomfort. Because
Mm.
you know, the more you sit with yourself is the more that you realize that everybody is in the same deep shit you're in.
Right.
Right, and it's not just like you know, it's like as if we were sitting right now and you're like, oh, why is COVID happening to me? It's like, well, not just happening to you, it's happening to everybody. And that could be
Yeah.
said with everything, with grief, it could be with you know, economic challenges or insecurities, fears,
Mm-hmm.
that everybody experiences them. And the more that you're able to open up and just speak from a place of truth, then the more you realize that it's you know, it's what we're all going through. It's part of the human and living experience of being a, you know, being in this 3D world, you know.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't think of a better note to to wrap up on than that, because that was really wonderful, and I think really beautiful advice, or really beautiful words for artists everywhere, but just kind of humans everywhere, is that the vulnerability is truly, it's the only way to live a life that's significant, I think. And the more you let yourself be brave and vulnerable, the more you'll find connection with people and reward in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for the invitation and like talking with me and listening to me.
Yeah, this was my absolute pleasure to finally be able to talk and to talk about such great things with you. The best place for people to find you would be on your Instagram, would you say?
Yeah, Instagram, and anywhere.
Instagram, just
Up
give
there.
you a Google. Yeah.
Google it up,
Yeah.
Let the trackers track you.
Yeah. It's all out there. Yeah. So, thank you again. It was super delightful, and I know that you're gonna pop on and chat with Ronaldo in just a moment here, so that will be wonderful too for having our chats in English and Spanish. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for being set for the whole hour. Then thank you.
Well, that's our show this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Emmy Yu, the Executive Director of STPI, Creative Workshop and Gallery Singapore. We'll chat about how she came to STPI, the journey of building the reputation of the Institute from struggling at first to get artists to eventually going to all 4 Art Basels. We also see what 2021's looking like and how COVID has affected everything. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing from Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.